Tonight, I'm talking about climate change solutions, personal and political, and Patrick hasn't seen this presentation before, but a lot of this is based on my experience with doing these things. So I'm not talking to you tonight about theoretical things. I'm talking about things that we've done and I know work. So the title of this used to be personal or political. And my thinking has really changed on this. I think now it really needs both. I mean, it's such a huge issue that it demands national policy change. And it was hard for me at first to understand how important personal actions are. So those are some of the things I want to explore with you tonight. So, few assumptions here right at the start. Climate change is real. It needs aggressive action now. I don't want to debate with deniers. It's just a waste of your breath and your energy. You're never going to convince those people at this point. And so we need to work and build more people who are maybe uncommitted or unsure. And adamant deniers, just walk away and leave them alone. And we want to focus on solutions. I mean, there's been a lot of doom and gloom talk about the seas are going to rise, and that doesn't make much difference here in Prescott, Arizona. Or the glaciers are going to melt. Well, that doesn't affect us either, but it certainly could affect our forests in a substantial way. I mean, we do have a local stake in this. So, just a quick introduction on this whole climate change issue. 400,000 years ago, over to 0 on the x-axis, and the y-axis here, the vertical axis, is carbon dioxide concentration. In all the graphs and things, it says CO2, but what it really means is greenhouse gas equivalents. So we're talking about, I'll talk more about that in a second. So you can, So you can see high concentration, warm, ice age, 100,000 years later, high concentration of carbon dioxide, high temperatures, decreases, we get an ice age. So we've been having these oscillations for a few 100,000 years. And I think recently, the last 100,000 years, recent history, Earth's temperature has been zigging and zagging, but it's been generally going down until maybe the Industrial Revolution. And now you see a spike in greenhouse gas levels that is unparalleled in the history of the Earth. Unparalleled in the history of the Earth. This is remarkable. If we look at just from, say, 1960 up to 2020, you can see these are the observations. So this is the recent monthly mean carbon dioxide concentrations at Mauna Loa on Hawaii. I'm going there in 2 weeks. I'm going to go to the observatory. So I think this will be interesting. But it's just a relentless increase. And so now it's over 415 parts per million. So this is higher than it's been for the last 2 million years, which is how long Homo sapiens has been on the face of this earth. This is a remarkable situation, and it's really a problem. If you look at a greenhouse gas index, so that's over here on the right-hand axis, where it's in 1990 is the baseline right here. The annual greenhouse gas index was 1. Now it's 1.4. This includes contributions from carbon dioxide, from methane. Methane, of course, comes from melting permafrost, melting methane hydrates at the ocean floor in the Arctic. It comes from drilling for natural gas and leakage from that. I don't know my own buttons here, sorry. The light green then comes from nitrous oxide, which is a byproduct of animal agriculture. And these other two, the darker green and the orange, are halogenated hydrocarbons. These are typically released from refrigeration units. And so all of these add up and to trap heat in the lower atmosphere. As a result, we see that since 1895, with respect to this average, which was the average of 1901 to 2000, that we're way warmer, 3 degrees warmer than the 1901-2000 average. So, and that's all happened since like basically 1980. So the greenhouse gases have gone up, temperatures have gone up. Duh. These are related. The effects of this are projected to be, they were released in reports from the IPCC and the National Climate Assessment version 4. Science has underestimated the effects of this all along, probably because the deniers have hammered scientists, accusing them of all kinds of weird conspiracies. And so scientists tend to be very conservative about these things anyway. They have underestimated the effects. And the effects are severe for both a rise of 1.5 or 2 degrees C. And science has also underestimated the rapidity of these effects appearing in our climate. So science really has done a great job defining and describing climate change, but they've been a little conservative, and that's unfortunate. The World Bank, not exactly a radical organization, says we're on track for a 4-degree warmer world by 2100 if we don't do anything. And quote, this is the one that chills me, there is no certainty that adaptation to 4 degrees C is possible.
Wow.
Now think about that. We got a problem. We have a big problem. And the effects of that are going to be things like unbreathable air, heat, death, drowning, war and immigration, hunger, economic collapse, unnatural disasters, dying oceans, wildfire, freshwater shortages, and that's before we hit the tipping points. So I want to talk about this idea of tipping point a little bit. A tipping point is a small change in some Earth, let's say, ecological economic system. A small change in a system that has a very large effect. That's what a tipping point is. So let's imagine that you've got like a glass of water on the table here. A glass, just an empty glass. And you take that glass and you just tilt it a little bit and let go. So it's going to come back into position, right? And then you tip it a little further and it'll come back into position. And you tip it a little bit further and all of a sudden it starts to tip over and it goes faster and faster and faster and it hits the floor and disintegrates into a bunch of shards of glass. So it went from one stable state on the table down to another stable state on the floor. But the one on the floor is a disaster. And so the tipping point, that's just a kind of one example of it. So tipping points that we might find in if we're talking about disasters, how about melting permafrost that releases methane into the atmosphere? So as the Arctic temperatures, which are increasing faster than any place else on Earth, as Arctic temperatures increase, permafrost melts, it releases methane into the air, which is a very powerful greenhouse gas, which accelerates the heating of the atmosphere, which accelerates the melting of the permafrost, and you get a positive feedback loop. You know, so a positive feedback is very dangerous. Example of that, let's just take the thermostat in your house. So if you set the thermostat, it's cold outside, right? So you come in the house, it's 55 degrees, and you turn the thermostat, and you only set it for 68, right? Because I know you're all conscientious people. And so that signal then, the thermostat says, oh, I need to increase the temperature in here up to 68, and the furnace comes on, heats up the room, and normally then it shuts off when it gets to 68. So that's a negative feedback loop. When the temperature falls, the system increases the temperature to a set point. When it gets cold again, it'll come back on, heat it back up to that set point. That's normal. What if somehow the thermostat flipped out and didn't shut off? So what if the thermostat thought that if it's over 68, I need to add heat? Well, then it would just keep adding heat and adding heat and adding heat. That's a positive feedback loop. So tipping point then are some point in the system operation where there's a change between negative and positive feedbacks. And this happens in social systems as well as physical and climatic systems. For instance, what happened when Martin Luther nailed up 95 principles on the wall of the church? Well, the conditions were right. It was the Catholic Church at that point was seriously corrupt. And that one act created a whole new religion, Protestantism, and changed the political and cultural landscape in Europe and the world. That was a tipping point. So tipping points happen under a certain set of conditions, and we need to be really aware of this. So these disasters are happening more frequently lately. So since 2000, you've got these disasters that I named off, and there's more of them happening. So it's happening now. And locally, what's happening, this is 2019 results for Prescott, and the average temperature is 1.2 degrees Fahrenheit, this time above normal. And the average rainfall is 14.2 inches, average is 19. So we're seeing drier and warmer already. If we look at projections, this is from the University of Arizona's climate model. This is online. You can go online, find this, and do your own projections. Kind of fun. Maybe not fun. But this is using the higher emissions. This is if we do nothing. So all the IPCC conditions use the RCP 8.5 as if we do nothing and continue what we're doing, then that's the scenario they're analyzing. And so you can see here that there's a 10-degree temperature rise with respect to 2000 by 2085. High temperatures in town, 107 or so. Used to be 96. This affects us here. If you look at rainfall, you see that rainfall goes up from just under 20 inches to just over 21 inches. Well, there's more moisture is held in a warmer atmosphere, so there's be more rain. But because the evapotranspiration potential of warmer soil surfaces more than compensates for that, you see that the water deficit is only 40 inches in the hole here. We are in an arid climate. I mean, that's what that means. And it's going to get 25% worse. So that affects our water supply, recharge. It affects Blairsville and the Verde River and all our springs. So this stuff is going to affect us. So what do we need to do? The current track is if we do nothing, we're on for 4 degrees. 12 years to get down to cut CO2 emissions by 45% by 2030. It's only 10 years now. I think this was an old slide I did. Just caught that. And 100% cut by 2050 is what we need to do to stay. That's the limit from the Paris Peace Conference, right? So we have a lot of work to do. This is extraordinarily ambitious to rebuild an economy, the largest economy on Earth, in 30 years. That's rebuilding it is what it needs. The 2-degree limit, we could drag it out a little bit to 2070, but there's very severe effects there too. So we have a big problem. We have a big challenge to address it. And attitudes have changed. 10 years ago it was a hoax, and then it's real, but it's not caused by humans. You remember all this, right? I mean, we've seen this this happen, and then finally they say it's real, it's caused by humans, and it's too late to stop it. Yeah. Well, it's not that it's too late to stop it. Apparently, they're accelerating it. The current administration has now rolled back 95 environmental rules in air pollution and emissions that directly worsen greenhouse gas emissions. Rules in drilling and extraction that directly increase greenhouse gas emissions. Not to mention rolling back the Clean Power Plan, not to mention rolling back the CAFE standards for fuel economy in vehicles. This is part of the crisis. And then this came out yesterday. So that affects the Verde River, Granite Creek, all our creeks, Big Chino Wash, Bill Williams River, Little Colorado River, almost every waterway in Arizona. All right, so maybe there's hope. Maybe technology can save us. Yeah? Okay, clean coal? That's a great response, thank you. So they've tried it, it works, it's very expensive, they don't know what to do with the gas that they extract yet, and it just seems like the hard way to do anything. Ocean fertilization, have you guys heard about this one? Okay, the idea is you take rust, iron oxide, and you sprinkle it all over the surface of the ocean, and that fertilizes the algae which grow and extract carbon dioxide from the ocean and the atmosphere, and then the algae, I guess, dies and falls down the bottom of the ocean, and you've effectively captured and contained carbon from the atmosphere by this method. Big ocean. How about solar radiation management? There's been a lot of engineers thinking, now we can solve this. All we have to do is put up these giant mirrors up in space and reflect some of the sunlight back into space before it comes down into the atmosphere. Or we can spray seawater way high up in the stratosphere, and that would reflect, it'd make kind of a nice gray haze all over the place all the time. That's great. Or spray sulfur dioxide up there. That's what volcanoes do. Those things would work, but the problem is there's tremendous unintended consequences from this kind of thing. And the studies that have been done on the radiation management solutions show that what it does is it impacts the people that can least tolerate the impact. It impacts indigenous people and agricultural economies in undeveloped countries. I mean, it's just not fair. There's easier ways, you know. We need, maybe nuclear energy is the answer. So the photo here, this is one of the units at Palo Verde, you know, which is one of the largest nuclear power plants in the United States. It's 3,300 megawatts. The problem is that nuclear power is very expensive. It's more expensive than any other kind of power we produce now. We can't build these plants quickly enough to make the difference. There's incredibly serious waste disposal issues with it. And then we do have this history of these little problems with it. And so, you know, the whole nuclear power question is something that's being under debate now. And it seems like where I think this should go is that probably we should leave Palo Verde there to work until its end of life and work on removing coal. That'll help the atmosphere most quickly. And eventually we can do without Palo Verde, but we kind of need that. Nuclear doesn't release carbon into the atmosphere once it's up and running, at least. So we should probably leave that alone and just hope that it works okay until we get this problem well on the way to being solved. So basically, what I'm suggesting is it's time to panic, and this is useful because it does spur people to action, and as a society, we are kind of crisis-oriented people. We're not too good at thinking ahead and planning ahead, but by gosh, if there's a crisis, Americans jump on it and do something about it, you know? All right, so let's declare the crisis. This whole thing is a global issue, and the U.S. needs to take a leadership role. It's going to require a lot of policy changes and laws to make this happen. It's the only way it's going to happen. We need to start by declaring a climate emergency now. Prescott City Council needs to do that. The state needs to do that. And the Sierra Club has a bill into the state legislature to do this now. It won't go anyplace because it won't ever get a hearing, but we're trying. I think that there is a fix possible. I don't think this is hopeless. There's no single solution. It's going to take a combination of many solutions. And they're common sense solutions. Number one, leave fossil fuel in the ground. Number two, we need to make a rapid transition to a 100% renewable energy economy. This is the Green New Deal. This is the heart of the Green New Deal. I'll talk about that later on in the talk. Once we've stabilized greenhouse gas emissions, we need to start drawing those levels down. And there's ways to do that. There's a whole great solution on that I'll talk about. 100 great solutions. All this is possible, and it's affordable. We can do this. We can solve this problem. We just need to decide we're going to do it. So personal action is a piece of this, and it's both absolutely necessary and insufficient. So that sounds like some kind of a conflict and conceptual conflict here, but there's a lot of things we as individuals can't do. We can't stop mining and burning coal. We can't stop subsidies for fossil fuel production. We can't stop Brazil from burning the Amazon, etc. But at least if you start doing personal mitigation actions, you and I and all of us in the room, at least you won't feel like a hypocrite. At least you're going to feel like you're doing something, and that makes you feel better. It makes you feel a little less helpless. So that's a really good reason to do it. But personal actions can become a movement. And this is the key. I want you to think about this tipping point idea. If enough of us get together and do stuff, we can make a tipping point in our socioeconomic policy. That's the huge, big value of all of you getting on board, doing things in your personal life to reduce greenhouse gas loads, and telling your neighbors about it. Because Bill McKibben, you know who Bill McKibben is, right?
Yes.
Well, he's been writing on climate change stuff since the 1970s. And he's the founder of 350.org, the website, and the goal is to keep greenhouse gas levels below 350 parts per million. Yeah, well, we blew that limit off already. And he's written a bunch of books on this, and he has frequent articles in the New Yorker and the New York Times. Really a good thinker, and you should look him up and read. He's an insightful man. So he said this, it says, we need to become a movement. Movements are what take 5 or 10% of people and make them decisive, because in a world where apathy rules, 5 or 10% is an enormous number. So that's the tipping point, 5 or 10%. Now, I just read an academic article that's talking about socioeconomic tipping points, trying to identify them and identify what the quantify what that tipping point is, and it's in the same zone as that. Horrible article to read, full of all kinds of academic jargon and baloney, but some interesting points. I have trouble going to sleep at night. This thing put me right out. So that's the task I'm presenting to you now with all the personal solutions I'm going to go to, is to do something yourself so you'll feel better, do something yourself and talk to your friends, and to become a movement. That's the only way that we're going to accomplish the changes we need to do. So I was in Bar Harbor, Maine for September 25th. That was Greta Thunberg's climate strike movement. And students from College of the Atlantic and the local high school put on a protest rally in the town square. 10% of the town showed up. There was 400 people there, and Bar Harbor's only 4,000 people. So, but that's 10%. If we did that here in Prescott, we'd have 4,000 people on the square. That's where we need to head. These young women and young men did a fantastic job. They had 7 things. Number 1, declare a climate emergency. They had songs they wrote. It was really reassuring to see youth getting involved in this. And I walked away with the feeling that, you know, the youth, maybe they're going to save us. Because so far, we haven't done it. So, let's get into talk about solutions. One solution, class of solutions, is mitigation. And what mitigation is, reducing risk through emissions reductions. Another type of solution is, let's see, is adaptation. Reducing risk through minimizing exposure. So as an example of that, so wildfire is a risk factor here in our area, especially for homes that are in the wildland-urban interface. People up in the pines and stuff. So the risk, the adaptation to climate change is to go in there and thin out those trees and the underbrush within, say, a mile of those homes, so that wildfire wouldn't penetrate. Another example of adaptation is like what New York is thinking about, a $60 billion project to build a seawall all around the town. Really? So, really, I mean, this can get absolutely nuts, and it seems like the mitigation thing is the way to head. It's the way to go. So, these mitigation and adaptation can happen via political change and by personal actions. So why you? Because you're the only ones, not our government. We're it. It's up to us. The government's not going to help us. The government's hurting us. So that's why you. And will it help? Yeah, because we can make a movement and we can make a tipping point. So, personal actions you can take. First of all, learn. Now, on the way out, I want you to pick up a handout I have called What You Can Do. And it's on both sides of that. It's got stuff, and it has links to all the websites I'm going to talk about, and it has a list of all the actions. And from now on, I'm kind of running down that list. So grab that and take it with you on the way out. So learn about the issues. There's 2 sites that will help you get started learning about it. And again, they're on that list. Talk to your neighbors. Focus on uncommitted or uninformed citizens. Ask your church to discuss the moral imperative for action on climate change. And so in the Youth by Climate Change Coalition, working with the faith community has been inspiring and helpful. A great example of how this has paid off is what the Granite Peaks Unitarians just did. Patrick, could you just quickly describe that? Because this just happened last week and I'm not in the loop.
Yes, actually it happened in late December, and the governing board of Granite Peak Unitarian Universalist Church declared a climate emergency. So Gary had referenced earlier that cities and states and even countries are doing that. We're clearly the first church that has done that. In Arizona, we may be one of the first in the United States. And I think it's a signal because it's calling for action. It's calling for action not just within the congregation itself and looking at congregational practices and programs and services, but it's also saying, and commit yourself to action, within the broader community. So I think it's an important first step. If I may add at this point, because it made me think of it, was this coming Tuesday night, speaking of declaring climate emergencies, City of Flagstaff City Council is going to be considering declaring a climate emergency. And then with reference to your point about youth, this whole initiative to urge and mobilize folks is really a youth-led movement to declaring climate emergency. They want to raise this to a tipping point that we're in a crisis.
Thank you, Patrick. So I want to give you a goal. So as we go, I'm going to dive into your personal solutions next. Here's your goal. Reduce your family emissions 20% this year. That means 4 tons of greenhouse gas. Your normal emissions, so I have a calculation error there. I've been looking at so many numbers. No, I think that's right. We'll see in a minute. Set a goal. You know, this is the first step for action. This is the handout, and I'm just showing you it has personal actions, political actions, and elections issues for you to consider. And then on the back is a reference list that gives addresses for local groups, some great books to read, news articles on the web. These TED Talks are really great ways to learn because you can just sit there, you watch a 15-minute thing and you get the idea. So, and then I'm going to talk about carbon offsets, and there's a lot of information here on that. So be sure and pick that up on the way out. Okay, I got ahead of myself. That's a pull out on the TED Talks that are listed. So, in researching what you can do, this is something that a lot of places suggest, a smaller family. And I put a question mark there because I'm frankly not on board with this. You know, it's true that population growth increases greenhouse gas emissions, you know. But is this practical? Is it fair? Is it timely and effective? Yeah, I don't think so. First of all, it's a biological, an evolutionary biological imperative to procreate and have children, and it's one of the great joys of life. Seems to me that we should be able to have reasonable sized families and still not destroy the earth we depend on. And so I don't think it's fair to put this off on children. We've already done that enough. That's what Greta Thunberg is telling us about. Is that she's warning that we have damaged the futures of children. And it's not timely. I mean, the whole children thing, you know, takes generations, and we've got 10 years. So you're going to hear people talk about this, and to me, this is not something we really should work on. So I think it's smart to start working on the biggest contributions that you make to greenhouse gases. So average household emissions, personal greenhouse gas emissions are 20 tons a year. So 20% of that is 4 tons, so that was right. Nationally, just another little factoid, Arizona is kind of in the middle of all the states and as far as emissions. We're by no means the worst of the bunch. So the biggest one is transportation. Next, 26% is purchases you make. 17% is home energy use. Heating, cooling, lights, like that. Okay? And then 14% is food and other. So this chart came from the Union of Concerned Scientists, and they never explained what other means. Yeah. So it's kind of a unclassifiable grab bag of stuff. Don't ask me, I can't tell you. So let's start working on the big ones first. Well, but then I thought there's something that's not on there, and that's money. So a lot of seniors in here, you've got IRAs, you've got investments. You know, I hope you do, because if you're living off Social Security, you're in tough shape. I do. And so it's important to follow the money. Here's an article by Bill McKibben in the New Yorker magazine talking about disinvestment. He's led a really successful campaign to get colleges and universities to eliminate fossil fuels from their endowments, their endowment investments. And so you can do that too. So follow the money, disinvestment. Those references are on the sheet. You can go there and they will show you what investment funds are fossil fuel free funds and sustainable investments. There's a lot of them. You know, so you have money, say, in most people have a mutual fund, and I'm spacing out the name of one, Franklin, or what's another popular one? Help me out here.
Vanguard.
Fidelity. So Vanguard and Fidelity, they have a whole bunch of things, a portfolio of investments you can do. So let's suppose you own some Fidelity fund, and so in that fund, you buy shares in the fund, but that fund has investments in healthcare, technology, energy, a whole group of classifications. That's why they're good investments, because they're diversified. So you can't just ask Fidelity, look, I don't want the fossil fuels. They say, well, you're going to take the whole thing, you're going to leave it. So you got to find a fund that doesn't include fossil fuel investments. So that can be done, and there's the references for that. So you want to avoid the investments in fossil fuels. Now, to do this, you need to consult with your investment advisor or broker, because if you just go dump, $2 million worth of Fidelity, I mean, you might as well think big. You're probably, especially these days, you're going to generate a huge tax problem. And there's ways to make that adjustment to minimize that. So you probably need some professional advice to do this. Fossil fuel stocks are not a good investment. Fossil fuel investment values are based upon their proven reserves. And so if all of a sudden we leave fossil fuels in the ground, a large part of the value of these companies, it just disappears, and the stocks are going to crash. Investment people know this now. I don't know if you do, but you should not be in coal. You shouldn't be in oil, you shouldn't be in gas. Where you should be is in renewable energy sources. And as an example of that, two of the big boys, Goldman Sachs and BlackRock, have recently sworn off fossil fuel investments.
Wow.
That's a positive, you know. So in general, in the investment business, I think you do better personally when you do what the big boys do. Get out of those fossil fuel stocks before you eat it. So you can invest in mitigation and renewable energy. And so I put trees up here because Steve Cook has got a hot idea on how to invest in trees. And so afterwards, if you're interested in investing in something that will really mitigate climate change, let's have Steve go in the back corner and you can talk to him, and he has some handouts and stuff, and it's a really interesting idea he has. Well, here's the worst one of all. JP Morgan Chase, $200 billion. They're the biggest funder of fossil fuels in the world, the biggest funder of fossil fuel expansion, the biggest tar sands funder in the world, the biggest funder of Arctic oil and gas in the world, the biggest funder of coal mining in the world, the biggest funder of liquefied natural gas in the world, the biggest funder of ultra-deep drilling in the world, the second biggest funder of fracking in the world, and the third biggest funder of coal power in the world. Is this a company you want to deal with?
No.
That's my point. Switch banks. Go to some local bank. Get your money out of Chase. You're tainted by dealing with them. Cut up your Chase credit card. So, I've had a Chase credit card since 1990. You know, I used to run my business off of it, and it's gone. Find a bank that doesn't invest so heavily in fossil fuels. I'm going to try to use Capital One for a while. They have about $4 billion in capital in fossil fuel investments, as opposed to 200, so that's an improvement. But Tom Steyer, do you know the name?
Yes.
So he started something called Beneficial State Bank, and that's in California now. And they have a very green business model, and they will soon be issuing credit cards. And so that may be the place to go. So if you go to that bank, just Google for it. You can sign up to be notified when their cards are ready. It should be in a few months.
What's the name of it again?
Beneficial Bank. Yeah.
Beneficial what?
Bank.
Bank.
State.
So, this was a chart that was done just to hammer this point home on you if you don't have the message already. This is a chart done by the Rainforest Action Network. And so here's JP Morgan Chase with the maximum investment. Right behind it, Wells Fargo, Citi, Bank of America. So those are probably all ones you could stay away from. I just fingered Chase because they're so egregious. These others are mainly foreign banks, banks of China, Deutsche Bank, etc. So Rainforest Action Network has a whole huge report on this kind of stuff. So these are important ways of letting these people know. If you bail out on them, you got to tell them. Tell them why. All right, transportation was one of the biggest ones. So passenger car and light duty truck. So what do we got? 58% of transportation greenhouse gases are on our dime. Those passenger cars and light duty trucks are our deal. So this is a big and important one. So what you can do is cut driving, which gives 0.8 pounds per mile. You can reduce air travel also, which is more efficient than driving, but still releases a lot of greenhouse gas. You can use carbon-free transportation, so walk or bike as much as possible. And e-bikes are great. Jim Stein here, show us who you are, Jim. You talk to him about e-bikes afterwards. Let me ride his e-bike. It was like really cool.
That figure on driving, does it make a difference what it is you're driving?
So Sandy asked, the driving, does it matter what you drive? Yeah, that's an average for all cars in the United States. Sure, it matters what you drive.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how do we determine our car?
Yeah.
And the,
Well, maybe I've got some numbers coming up that'll help you do that.
That's a good question.
So, and then what I also want to talk about carbon offsets. So the idea is to, minimize your carbon contribution to the atmosphere by these methods, and then you can purchase carbon offsets to compensate for necessary driving, to compensate for necessary flights, and I've got some information on that coming up. So, EV, electric vehicles, just rock. These things are great, and they're quiet, they're smooth, relaxing, they're cheap, and they're fast. I just got one, so you can tell I'm still...
What is it?
I'm going to show you a picture in a minute. And it's really great. It's really great. So there's different kinds. You got hybrids, have both a gas and electric motor. You have a small battery capacity that's recharged when you brake. It's called regenerative braking. You don't plug them in or anything. So Prius is the main one of those. So Prius turns out to be just a nice, very efficient gasoline car. Okay? So that's a good start. A plug-in hybrid would be the next one up the line. This is what I got. So the battery range on it would be 20 to 50 miles is typical on the battery. After that, the gas motor comes on and you can just keep driving. So that's very handy. A lot of people have this range anxiety is what it's called about having an electric vehicle. What if I'm on the night and the battery runs out? And you go, oh man, that would be bad. So the plug-in hybrid takes care of that. And so Prius has a plug-in hybrid with a 20-mile range. It'll go 47 miles an hour. The Volt has a 50-mile-an-hour range, and it'll do 80 on electric. I mean, it's a great little car. And then you have the all-battery EVs. They have no gas motor. The battery range ranges between 1 and 300 miles. And these are made by Tesla. Bolt is made by Chevrolet, and the Nissan Leaf, and there's many others, and you can just Google for these babies and find out all kinds of information. Carol?
Yeah, so if our electricity is made in a way that creates...
I'm going to get to that point. All right, yes. Good. So this is what I got. It's a 2017 Volt, V-O-L-T. It goes 50 miles on electric. It gets 4 miles per kilowatt hour. And so next I'm going to explain kilowatt hours and kilowatts to you. And it gets over 100 miles per gallon E, electric or equivalent. So what you're going to see that too. And what that means is that's how many miles the car would drive on the energy equivalent of a gallon of gasoline. So a gallon of gasoline has 37.7 kilowatt hours of energy in it. So the car would go that over 100 miles on 37.7 kilowatt hours of energy. This is actually a pretty stupid measurement that's very confusing and is not so great, but that's what it means. Recharges in 4 hours, off-peak at 6 cents a kilowatt hour. That's the equivalent of 60 cents a gallon gasoline for operating this car. Who wouldn't like that? Yes, sir.
Gary, it's a four-seater. What's the weight of the car?
I have no idea. I don't know. The gasoline range on it is 350 miles. It gets 48 miles a gallon on gas. We drove it to Santa Cruz and back over Christmas to see Mom, and it was just really quiet and comfortable. It was a great little car. I can't believe that I bought a Chevrolet. I can't believe that GM designed this. They just did a superb job. Who would have thought?
You can't believe it that they don't make them anymore.
And then, yeah, so Jim just pointed out, they just discontinued these. 2019 was the last year. And so, why did they discontinue it? Is this just another example of bad corporate decision-making, or what?
They're going out of the car business into the pickup truck business.
There's a lot of reasons, yeah. None of them good. So that's a shot off the dash. So I went 38 miles and used that much, and here's the MPGE. 200. Well, it didn't use any gas, so right, no miles. So I live in Chino. We can go to Prescott, run around, go home. That motor never comes on. What's not to like about this? Yes.
What about recharging stations? Do you install one at your home, and where else are they?
I just recharge at home.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you had to install one.
No, I just plug it into the wall.
That's what I don't know.
Yeah, just plug it into the wall. 12 amps, recharges overnight. 12 amp, 110 volt, no problem.
Gary, going to Santa Cruz, did you plan your route so that you could have recharge stations along the way?
No, I just bought gas.
Okay.
I mean, even if you get a $50,000 Tesla or something, 300-mile range, you go to Santa Cruz 700 miles, you'd have to stop twice and recharge. You'd spend hours recharging. So, to me, the plug-in hybrids are really a good combination vehicle. They can do long trips and so, I mean, it's not perfect. You're still going to be using gasoline, but in this whole affair, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Just get started and do something, right? Okay. So, electricity, kilowatts versus kilowatt hours. People get really confused by this. So, the other day I had a bunch of Prescott College students down on the Verde River doing a repairing ecology thing, and we finished and we're hiking out. We got to go 300 feet uphill. So we all start off together. By the time we get up to the top of the hill, they're sitting around waiting for me.
Yeah.
You know that both of us use the same amount of energy going up the hill, right? The energy required to go up the hill is the same. It's just formula gravity times the altitude gain. But they use more power. They had more horsepower to go faster up that hill. So people confuse this a lot. You get billed on the energy you use, kilowatt hours. So APS generates their 64% fossil fuel. And so here's the breakdown in natural gas and coal. And they're 35% clean energy, which includes some nuclear, and 9.2% are renewable. 2018 figures. Well, I'd love to get rid of all of this.
Yeah.
I'd like to get it all to this, but that's where they are now. The national average for electricity is 1 pound of greenhouse gases per kilowatt hour. APS average is about 0.8. So actually APS isn't as bad as some of the others. And that's, I think, due to this. Natural gas energy doesn't have the carbon load that coal does. So, on an electric vehicle, so I have a truck. I have to have a truck. It's Tacoma. It's not too bad on gas mileage, 20. It puts out a pound of CO2 per mile, and it costs 15 cents a mile to drive at 3 cents a gallon, at $3 a gallon. The Volt gets 4 miles per kilowatt hour. It puts out 0.21 pounds of CO2 per mile. That's the energy, the release from the energy from APS. So that's my contribution, Carol. So it's 1/5 of driving a regular car. That's pretty good. And it cost me 1.5 cents per mile, 1/10 the operating cost. Not to mention highly infrequent oil changes. Brakes don't need to be replaced because you're using regenerative braking almost all the time. I think this is a winner. So if I drive the Volt 20,000 miles on electric, I'll save 4,100 pounds of CO2. That's 2 tons. I just met half of my family goal, right? Right there. So, it saves me $2,700 a year in fuel costs compared to the truck. So, I can take that you could take that $2,700 and do something to invest in your home to make it more energy efficient and reduce your greenhouse gases. So this is a win-win. This is a photo of Navajo Generating Station in Page. It closed December 2019. It's coal-fired. It emitted 20 million tons of CO2 per year. It was almost 30% of Arizona's total greenhouse gas emissions. It closed down because it was one of the dirtiest plants in the United States. It obscured air quality throughout the Southwest and the Four Corners and impacted the health, $130 million a year worth of health effects, primarily on indigenous populations near the plant, the Navajo and the Hopi people. So these environmental problems are social justice issues also. So this is cool, this is hopeful. We've gotten rid of one plant, and now yesterday, how about this? I mean, the clouds have parted and the sun is shining in, and APS, who's put dirty money into electing corporation commissioners that would give them favorable treatment on rate cases. APS, who put tens of millions of dollars into defeating Prop 127 using lies, outright lies. And now, what a difference a change in leadership makes. This new guy, Jeff Gullner, he says the plan is ambitious and requires technology we don't have, but by setting the goal, the company will move in the right direction.
Wow.
Yay, APS. This was just a total shock, and so things are moving in the right direction. They're moving towards that tipping point. I want you all to help push, right? Carbon offsets. The idea is reduce what you can and offset what you can't. So carbon offsets counterbalance your carbon use by funding projects that capture or prevent greenhouse gas emissions. Before you buy offsets, you need to be sure that they're real. There is some fraud out there involved with these. And you can purchase offsets. For example, we're going to Hawaii in a couple of weeks. 2 persons round trip from Phoenix is 4 tons of carbon in the air. And I can purchase an offset for that. They're available from $8 to $15 a ton of carbon. So I got a carbon offset certificate that gives me 10,000 pounds of CO2 equivalent, and it was $60. So that covered our trip to Maine also. So to me, this is a totally reasonable price to pay. I mean, I feel kind of clean about going to Hawaii, you know? And so there's references on the handout that tell you where you can buy them, several places. And so I like this approach.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of,
But where does the money go?
Yeah, how does that
okay,
work?
so the indulgence, wait. I was thinking about Luther, and you know. Oh, these Freudian, that was a good one. You know, the Catholic Church, one of the reasons that Luther's declaration got such traction is because the Catholic Church was selling indulgences to rich people, saying, you give me all this money, you'll go to heaven, right? So in a way, that's rich. It's kind of like an indulgence. I do feel a little clearer about buying like that. Yeah, Trevita.
How exactly do they work?
Okay, so what I did is I invested money in a project that prevents methane releases from landfills. Okay? And there's a wide variety of these projects. Some of them are like tree planting things, but maybe the benefits from that won't occur for like 10 or 20 years. I thought the landfill thing was immediate. I liked it. That's why I got it. There were projects to give stoves that didn't make a lot of soot to villagers in Africa. And so there's a wide range of these projects, and you can go to those sites and pick the one you like and feel good about it. I don't think people were aware of this generally, that this is available, but this is one way to kind of pay a little bit and clean your conscience, okay? Yes, ma'am?
Rental cars will do it too. Some rental cars will do
And-
it.
So she's saying some rental car companies do this. Some companies, manufacturing companies, do this. Some airlines have built this into there. So you need to kind of ask around about it. This isn't necessarily so easy, unfortunately, to do. So there's the section that's on the back of the handout for you. And so I'm showing you other providers of carbon offsets, why you should buy them. And here's a way to calculate your carbon footprint, how much the flight is going to generate. All right, so the next thing in your home was reduce consumption and waste. So number one, avoid buying throwaway products and packaging. Number two, reuse what you can. Compost all the green waste so it doesn't show up as methane from the landfills. Recycle the rest. And here's the recycling thing. Aluminum is really good to recycle. Plastics and steel are good. Paper, glass is the worst. The remaining waste material goes to garbage. And then try and buy products made of recycled materials if you can. Home energy conservation. Typical household emits 48 tons per year. It's 10% of the U.S. total. To get around this, you should be using Energy Star appliances. That's an EPA rating system, and I'm concerned that Trump just killed that whole program, now that I think about it. But they're still labeled in the stores. Do cold water laundry, use a solar clothes dryer. Reduce the heating, cooling energy in your home by using a setback thermostat and LED lighting. All these things are broadly available in Lowe's or Home Depot or whatever. No rocket science here. Insulate your house so it doesn't lose heat. And use the sun. For example, you can use passive solar heating, add a solar greenhouse, install solar hot water, and install rooftop solar voltaic. So, here's my house. Doesn't even have a furnace in it. In Chino. And it's comfortable. It's 100% solar heated home. On the roof, this is a 40 square foot panel for hot water. It does 98% of our hot water in the house.
Wow.
98%. Here's clear story windows that let light into a room in the back of the house. So, and then there's an insulating shade on the inside to keep that heat inside at night. These panels heat water for a radiant floor system in the house. So 100% solar home, works great. Solar greenhouse. Hot air from the greenhouse circulates into the house. This is the main thing that heats the house. And tomatoes. We're picking tomatoes now. I mean, this is good. And then you can put a grid-tied photovoltaic system on the house. And just don't lean on APS. So it's a small system there out in my barn. It's like 2.5 kilowatt. I blew it when I put this on 9 years ago. I should have done it twice as big. And now APS rules won't let me upscale it. So there's a whole raft of nasty little ways that APS has gotten in the way of distributed solar. By distributed, I mean not a central array like is at the airport or out in Chino Valley, but I mean on this home, this home, this home, and this home. And that's really a smart way to do it because it relieves stress on the grid that connects the power plants and all the demand centers. So, so this was on my inverter. It says 61,000 pounds of CO2 saved. It's up to 66,000 now. Here's the thing, though, that you can do that's really easy. You can buy all your electricity from the wind with APS. Yeah. And I'm doing this on a small commercial building I have in town. Here's the name of the company that does it. It's on the form. And so you sign up with them. They will cover 50% of your energy with wind power, renewable energy credits at no charge to you. So that's not a bad deal. If you pay them 2 cents an additional kilowatt hour, they'll do 100%. And I think that's really worth it. I'm willing to pay a little more to do things right. And so here's their explanation of renewable energy credits.
When you join the Arcadia community, you are not just committing to a cleaner power bill for yourself. You are helping to clean up our entire energy grid. Here's how it works. When you connect your utility bill to our platform, we match your usage with wind energy at no cost through the purchase of renewable energy certificates, or RECs. RECs are used to track clean energy generation and usage, because once clean energy enters the grid, it's impossible to track exactly where the clean electrons end up. So every time a wind turbine generates energy for the grid, a REC is created and then sold. When we match your usage with RECs, it means that your home is officially powered by clean energy. In fact, 1 year of wind energy is like keeping nearly 8,000 pounds of coal from ever making it onto our grid. By using RECs, you are proving a market demand for clean energy. And the more RECs that are purchased, the more wind farms we need, and the closer we get to a fossil fuel-free future.
So here's my dashboard, and it shows for this for a commercial building, you know, more energy uses during the air conditioning season. This is all normal, and it's covering it all. So 12,000 kilowatt hours purchased, 10 tons of CO2 have been avoided, and they've got this great referral program. So, $1,000 for 10 signups. If you want to sign up, email me. My address is on the handout. I will see that all of that $1,000 goes to the Climate Change Coalition to further our work in this town. So, I've been doing this for a year. Works flawless.
Does it reduce your APS bill?
No, it doesn't reduce. To reduce your bill, you got to reduce your electricity use. Put in high efficiency air conditioning. That's big bucks. LED lights is cheap. Like that.
So I'm surprised that APS hasn't figured out a way to screw this up.
They're probably working on it. All right, so food. Food was the next biggest one, right? And so 10 to 30% of your home greenhouse gases come from food. And I want to point out that meat, dairy, beverages, fish, seafood, eggs are 89% of your household greenhouse gas load. So here's a thing you can do to really make a difference in your home for greenhouse gases. Eat a healthy, climate-friendly, whole food, plant-based diet. That's fruits, vegetables, beans, and nuts. I've been on this for 3 years. I'm not exactly, without energy. Without energy, and I feel great, and I love this. Meat is heat. Eliminate sugar, meat, and dairy products. That will help the greenhouse gas load, but it has other effects as well. So here's an example. So we've got a butternut squash soup and a crescent moon and floating in a sea of pinto bean chili soup with greenhouse tomatoes, salsa on top, and corn with pumpkin seeds, cornbread with pumpkin seeds. This kind of diet is not like dreary and awful and bland. It's not at all. This kind of diet is great. And then instead of sugary beverages, why don't you just make your own beer? And so, the beer bottle, you drink a beer bottle and you say, oh, I'll recycle the glass. Well, glass is not the greatest recycling thing, so reuse them. Fill them up with homebrew. Abandon Diet Coke and Coca-Cola and all that stuff. It's not healthy for you. And you could grow your own food. So here's our vegetable garden. And we grow a lot of our own food, and as you can tell, my wife just loves it. Some beautiful onions we got. And then regenerative. I've been farming in Chino for 40 years and trying to do it organically and well. So this is a great example of what we mean by regenerative agriculture. This is a 3-acre field that's going in sweet corn, which gets planted in these beds. And what I've done is I've knocked down a cover crop that's grain, rye, and vetch, which contributes about 4 tons per acre of green matter and enough nitrogen to grow 5-foot-high, 68-day corn with no added fertilizer. So, yeah, this works. I'm kind of retired from the farming now because I'm going to Hawaii.
Chino
Yes.
Valley? Chino Valley?
Yeah.
Chino, California.
Chino Valley.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. This diet has huge benefits to you in other ways. It's key to your health. If you're doing all this stuff right to create a carbon-free future, you should try and stick around and enjoy this wonderful world that we're allowed to live in.
One of the most prestigious medical journals in the world editorialized that climate change represents the biggest global health threat of the 21st century, and currently chronic diseases are by far the leading cause of death. Might there be a way to combat both at the same time? For example, riding our bikes instead of driving is a win-win-win for people, planet, and pocketbook. Good for us, the environment, and cheaper too. Are there similar win-win situations when it comes to diet? Well, the same foods that create the most greenhouse gases appear to be the same foods that are contributing to many of our chronic diseases. Meat, fish, eggs, and dairy were found to have the greatest environmental impact, whereas grains, beans, fruits, and vegetables had the least impact. And not only did the foods with the heaviest environmental impact tend to have the lower nutritional quality, but also a higher price per pound, thereby scoring that win-win-win scenario. The European Commission, the governing body of the European Union, commissioned a study on what individuals can do to help the climate. In terms of transport, if Europeans started driving electric cars, it could prevent as much as 174 million tons of carbon from getting released. We could also turn down the thermostat a bit, maybe put on a sweater. But the most powerful thing people can do shift to a meat-free diet. What we eat may have more of an impact on global warming than on what we drive. Even just cutting out animal protein intake one day of the week could have a powerful effect, so even just like meatless Mondays may beat out working from home all week and not commuting. And a strictly plant-based diet may be better still, responsible for only about half the greenhouse gas emissions. Overall, studies have suggested that moderate dietary changes are not enough to reduce impacts from food consumption drastically. Changes to healthier diets without significant meat and dairy intake reductions may only result in rather minor reductions of environmental impacts. This is because the average fossil energy input for animal protein production systems is like 25 calories of fossil energy input for every 1 calorie produced, more than 11 times greater than for grain protein production, for example, which is down around 2 to 1. Researchers in Italy compared 7 different diets to see which one was environmentally friendliest. They compared a conventional omnivorous diet, adhering to dietary guidelines, to an organic omnivorous diet, conventional vegetarian, organic vegetarian, conventional vegan, and organic vegan, to what the average person actually eats. For each dietary pattern, they looked at carcinogens, air pollution, climate change, effects on the ozone layer, the ecosystem, acid rain, and land, mineral, and fossil fuel use, and this is what they came up with. This is how many resources it took to feed people on their current diets, and this is the negative effects the diet is having on the ecosystem and the adverse effects on human health. Now, if they were eating a healthier diet, conforming to the dietary recommendations, the environmental impact would be significantly less. An organic omnivorous diet would be better, similar to a vegetarian diet of conventional foods, beaten out by an organic vegetarian diet, conventional vegan, and organic vegan diet. The Commission report described the barriers to animal product reduction, largely lack of knowledge, ingrained habits, and culinary cultures. Proposed policy measures include meat or animal protein taxes, educational campaigns, and putting the greenhouse gas emissions info right on food labels. Climate change mitigation is expensive. A global transition to even just a low-meat diet, as recommended for health reasons, could reduce these mitigation costs. A healthier low-meat diet would cut the cost of mitigating climate change from about 1% of GDP by more than half. A no-meat diet could cut 2/3 of the cost, and a no-animal product diet could cut the cost 80%. But many aren't aware of the cow in the room. It seems that very few people are aware that the livestock sector is one of the largest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions, but that's changing. The UK's National Health Service is taking a leading role in reducing carbon emissions. Patients, visitors, and staff can look forward to healthy, low-carbon menus with much less meat, dairy, and eggs. For evidence shows that, as far as the climate is concerned, meat is heat. The Swedish government recently amended their dietary recommendations to encourage citizens to eat less meat. Even if we seek only to achieve the conservative objective of avoiding further long-term increases in greenhouse gas emissions from livestock, we are still led to rather radical recommendations, such as cutting current consumption levels in half in affluent countries, an unlikely outcome if there were no direct rewards to citizens for doing so. Fortunately, there are such rewards, or important health benefits. By helping the planet, we can help ourselves.
So, I'll put it to you. Do you think this has merit? I mean, you can help the planet and you can help yourself. Switching to this kind of diet has personal health benefits, even if you start now as seniors. So, water conservation is another thing you can do. So here's some suggestions on how you can do this. Washing machines are a big one. City of Prescott has a great website to describe this stuff. So dual flush toilets, high efficiency washer, big difference here, see? Shower heads and faucets. Look for this water sense certification thing. And basically, you can't buy anything these days in Home Depot or Lowe's or something like that that doesn't meet these standards. It's really good. So here's the City of Prescott using drought-tolerant plants and supplementing them with rainwater harvesting. That's the Adult Center on Rosser. So that's a demonstration system. That's good. These are actual results from a friend that did a major water conservation retrofit on his house. He cut his water use to 10% of what it was. So this stuff works. So this is a big CWAG thing, and I don't want to go into too much of it here. So now we're into the political action point, and I'm nearing the end of this. I know it's a bit of a marathon, sorry. What we need to do locally and regionally is declare this climate emergency and adopt a climate action plan. So the Climate Change Coalition is working on that. I hope you would consider joining us. We can't get the City Council to do this, just us. We're going to need a lot of other organizations and a lot of people. So, look, here's an example of a tipping point I forgot to mention. Save the Dells. So, the council was ready to fall over and let the developer wipe out the Granite Dells. And Save the Dells got busy and they organized thousands of people and turned out thousands of people at public meetings and at city council meetings and put a lot of pressure on the city council and had allies. Other groups were asking the council to act on this, and lo and behold, the council flipped their position. Now they're working to protect the Dells. There's a tipping point. There's a tipping point. It's not a done deal yet. It's not certain, but there's an example of how, okay, let's say that Save the Dells had 4,000 people, right? That's 10% of the population of Prescott. There's your 10% tipping point. Yes, ma'am?
I think another tipping point resided in Barry Barbie's effort to save this building.
Oh, yes, that's an excellent one.
I didn't hear.
Barry Barbie, a local restaurant owner, did a huge postcard campaign, people writing to the council to get them to not downshift on the library. This is a great little library, you know. So, all right, so we've got a goal, net zero carbon economy by 2050. The town could develop a mass transit system and facilitate use of electric vehicles. The town itself could transition to renewable energy. You know, APS serves electricity here through a franchise agreement with the city. And when that franchise agreement comes up for renegotiation, we need to get the city to put some terms in there. Say, okay, APS, you can continue to serve electricity here, we need you, but we want you to build, you know, 100 megawatts of solar power here someplace. Why not? We got to put pressure on these things. There's stuff we can do. City of Flagstaff has a climate action plan. Why can't we have one? This is not like wild, radical, weird stuff. Many other communities are doing it. 1,060 cities in the United States have signed on to the U.S. Conference of Mayors Climate Change Adaptation Agreement, not Prescott. We asked them 2 years ago, and we didn't even get a second on the motion to consider it. So we have some work to do here locally. Other things they could do is, you know, see that word? This is going to make conservatives really nervous, I know that. But government regulation has a role, a valid role, and a necessary role, and this is where we need it. We need to require green building codes. We need to require solar on new homes. we need to require water conservation to drought tolerant landscaping, and Prescott is doing a pretty good job on that one right now. They're not totally there yet, but you got to give them credit. They're doing better. They need to provide incentives for existing homes to upgrade and add those solar systems. So there's a lot that can be done. The city itself should declare that it's going to be 100% carbon-free. Flagstaff has done that. I mean, not the whole, every business in the city, but the city municipal enterprises itself, they're going to make that. So that's a great step. That's a leadership step. Why can't we do that? We can do that. We just have to push the point. Waste recycling is weak. That needs to be greatly improved. So the next point of political action would be the Green New Deal. This is the resolution that was introduced into the House by Ocasio-Cortez and 80 other people, and into the Senate by Edmund Markey, the senior senator from Massachusetts, who has been a great advocate for climate change for decades. So this resolution, the Green New Deal, isn't like legislation. It isn't a program. What it is it's a resolution that states the intent of Congress to do a bunch of good stuff. Of course, the political opposition has come up with all kinds of straw man arguments, and we need to deal with that. So the Green New Deal is a great transition, not a Great Depression. This was going to stimulate the economy. It will achieve net zero greenhouse gases through a fair and just transition for all workers. The fair and just part is a really important part of the concept in the Green New Deal. It'll create jobs. It will invest in infrastructure, fixing bridges and highways and putting in electric vehicle charging stations, and it will repair the damage that's been done recently to clean air and water. And it promotes justice and equity for all people. That's a really key thing. So without going into a lot, there's a lot more to it than that. Those are the main points. And it states the intention of Congress to develop programs that accomplish this stuff. So the Green New Deal is not legislation, it's not programs. It's a statement of intent. How do you pay for something like this? Well, it's going to take about $1 trillion annually to do this. Well, number one, he just gave the top 1% $1 trillion tax cut, didn't pay for it. That's going right onto the deficit. So I think number one, for the first year, it's obvious what to do. Let's just kill that. Health savings by 2050 is estimated to be $2 trillion, cumulative till 2050.
Billion or trillion?
Billion or trillion?
10
Billion,
billion.
you're saying trillion.
Yeah, but it's 2,000 billion, which is
2 trillion.
2 trillion.
1,000 billion is $1 trillion. Okay. All right. Thanks for helping me clarify that. I mean, billions don't really sound like that much. Military spending cuts. 50% cut in military spending can easily be done. I mean, why not put some money into diplomacy and cut down our military footprint? So that $300 billion a year right there. Carbon fee, like a fee and dividend structure, could accumulate this much. How about a tax on financial? Some of the Democratic candidates are proposing this. This might be $300 billion a year. These numbers are pretty rough. In fossil fuel subsidies, the International Monetary Fund estimates that in 2015, the United States subsidy for fossil fuels was larger than the military budget.
Ooh.
So why don't we do away with that? Why don't we take that subsidy that's now on the books and put it to subsidizing renewable power? Do you think that would be a tipping point?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, big time. There's a lot that can be done. So Jacobson, professor at Stanford, did a huge study on costs of changing the worldwide power system to wind, water, and solar. And So I'm not going to go over all the details here, but the bottom line is that not doing it is unaffordable and uneconomical. And we could be at 100% by 2030. So this is a pretty significant study. It's about like 80 pages of stuff. And this is kind of the summary takeaway. Carol?
What is water?
That would be hydropower. Yeah. And did you have a comment also?
No, I was calling your attention to her.
Okay. All right. So, on the global basis, here's a list of solutions. There's a book called Drawdown, and it gives you a ranked sequence of things that we could do on a global scale to actually draw down atmospheric carbon levels and restore the well-being of Earth. And so you might look at the book, and you can get it at Peregrine. So number one, refrigerant management. Remember I was talking about chlorinated hydrocarbons in the air? That turns out to have an amazing impact on the atmosphere. Wind turbines onshore to generate electricity, big one. Of the 100 solutions they talk about, a quarter of them are related to food and agriculture. Reducing food waste, changing to a plant-based diet, changing to regenerative agriculture, etc. A quarter of them. So the food thing is really important. I gave you a 6-minute video on that, which is a lot of time. Because I think it's really, really important. And I want you to notice this one. Educating girls and family planning, number 6 and 7. You know, by empowering women to have more control over their lives and educating them and giving them the opportunity to participate in the economic system is really beneficial on a global scale. There's a really cool video about this referenced on your list. Okay, so with 2020 local election things, you need to make climate change an issue in the electoral dialogue. When you go to, we have elections in this fall, right, for city council and stuff, board of supervisors. This needs to be an issue. You need to ask that at the candidate forums. You need to push this issue. Push this issue into the dialogue, the electoral dialogue. Attend all these town meetings and ask them for a climate change action plan. Vote for candidates that have the right positions, and then contact your city council, contact your board of supervisors and senators and representatives and talk to them. They're happy to talk to citizens. They're just people. They're not going to hurt you. They're not going to yell at you no matter what you say to them. It's just on you to tell them what you want done. And if you don't say anything, it ain't going to happen. In the 2020 national elections, we need to ask Congress to implement the Green New Deal, restore the Paris Agreement, Clean Power Plan, the CAFE mileage standards, remove fossil fuel subsidies, and halt coal mining on public land. Big list, big important stuff. There's a lot that only they can do. This needs to be done without harming low-income residents. And then we need to resist war. War is not only morally hideous, it's totally unnecessary. And it has a huge carbon footprint. So you need to stand up and say, look, bring our troops home, invest in diplomacy, do the right thing. So Greenpeace has rated the candidates. These are the top ones. It goes down through on a whole bunch of them, and it includes President Trump, who got an F. We put the top ones up there. So you can go to Greenpeace's website and see the criteria by which they did this rating, and see if that matches your values. So I'm just showing you that this exists. I'm not necessarily endorsing anyone. So, let's get to work.